Hi, I'm Alexandra.
I'm Shri.
I'm Chloe.
I'm Kiera.
And I'm Anna Maria, and we're advocating for Building Futures, a nonprofit that focuses on homelessness of women and children in the Bay Area.
Supporting Building Futures and obtaining this grant is especially important to our group because, as a group of women, we understand the magnitude and history of gender based violence. Personally, witnessing domestic violence firsthand and knowing how prevalent it is in communities of color, I will do anything in my power to create a positive change. And I am certain that providing Building Futures with this grant is a step in the right direction towards that positive change.
Women and their families are the fastest growing portion of the homeless population. They comprise over 65% of it, with 84% of these families being led by women. Yet only 23% of shelters had women and children as shelter users. Clearly, women and their families aren't going to shelters, and this is a very urgent problem. Being a woman experiencing homelessness is a whole other challenge within itself. As a woman, you are physically vulnerable in the streets to violence that comes in many different forms, be it sexual assault, harassment, human trafficking, pimping, muggings, and more. Even in their own homes, they can be faced with domestic violence and abuse. In gender neutral shelters, women don't feel safe, as many can experience various forms of violence and harassment in these environments. Women and their families struggle to find proper accommodations and safety for that many people, as well as receiving the resources and services that they require for a long-term solution. This is a huge reason why revolving door homelessness occurs with this segment of the population, putting them in constant instability. Especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, multiple women have even died from domestic violence in this past year, as incident numbers have increased by 42% in the Bay Area alone. With this in mind, there is an additional layer of importance placed upon well-informed trauma care specialists for abuse, abrupt family separation, and violence towards children and these women. Intense women-centered care, counseling, therapy, comprehensive support systems, the proper tools to re-enter society with affordable housing and skills are needed for these women to cope with any future challenges and to prosper. Due to the unique and varying situations that many women face, a wide variety of needed services are very inaccessible to them. This is a chronic problem as a huge percentage of women and even those with huge familial responsibilities have needs that are being completely neglected and ignored. Research has shown that a woman's experience with homelessness differs greatly from a man's and therefore requires a completely different strategy to combat, as the one-size-fits-all approach is not sufficient. Gender-specific programming is the most effective in ending cycles of violence and homelessness in order to see any stable outcomes. There is resilience in every single woman, and Building Futures empowers and provides the necessary tools for women and their families to excel in their futures. We felt compelled to get involved with this long-standing problem, which is seen in our theory of change. By building female-only homeless shelters in the Bay Area that provide safe shelter, food, toiletries, and psychosocial services, we can reduce violence and increase access to basic needs for homeless women within 3 years. Building Futures is the absolute perfect organization to fulfill this ideal and to truly put it to fruition.
Building Futures is an organization that looks at homelessness through the lens of domestic violence in Alameda County. Their leadership consists of women of color whose primary focus is aiding women and children in domestic violence circumstances to gain the resources they need to feel safe, secure, and get back on their feet independently. Through their three-pronged approach, their ultimate end goal is to make sure everyone is in stable housing. In 1986, started as an overnight shelter for women fleeing domestic violence in the winter. As a grassroots community, a group of women at a church decided to do something about this homelessness. In 1988, they were able to expand to 30 beds. In 1996, they opened their first domestic violence safe house called Sister Me Home. In 2000, they expanded Sister Me Home, created a 24-hour toll-free crisis line, and started working on their second house. They continued to grow and cultivate programs throughout the years, and today they are currently at 10. They intend on continuously pushing forward. They want to create programs that provide permanent living, supporting children, and financial literacy development.
Building Futures adopts a three-pronged approach in their endeavors to serve Alameda County: homelessness, domestic violence, and housing. With 10 programs and services provided under these three prongs, they pursue their ultimate goal of getting everyone into stable housing. First is their Emergency Family Homelessness Program. 90% of the beneficiaries of this prong are women and children. At their two main shelters under this goal, the San Leandro Shelter and the Midway Shelter, residents receive full access to meals, beds, amenities, mail services, clothes, transportation, rehousing and children's programs, financial literacy, and dental, medical, and mental health services. It's a mouthful, but both of these shelters have been run with the utmost love and irrational commitment since the mid 1980s. They also provide two warming shelters, the Alameda Warming Shelter and San Leandro Warming Shelter. These warming shelters are open on nights when cold weather or rain is in the forecast. The program runs from November to April, where guests receive a shelter, dinner and breakfast, access to medical, dental, and mental health services, and more. As a part of their second prong, Building Futures provides a range of services for survivors of domestic violence. Their superlative service here is the Sister Me Home Safe House. At Sister Me Home, Building Futures provides 20 beds with 24-hour staffing and culturally appropriate support services. Sister Me Home is open to all fleeing domestic violence, regardless of gender identification. Sister Me Home residents receive all resources provided in the aforementioned shelters, along with case management support, mental health counseling and therapy, linkage to legal services, and domestic violence support groups. Domestic violence is the primary reason women and children become hopeless. So, Sister Me Home operates in a secure location and is specialized to offer proper support for trauma. Building Futures team recognizes the dire importance of addressing domestic violence as a contributor to homelessness, and they run programs including a 24-hour emergency support line and 40-hour domestic violence counselor training program. The Building Futures team cares about this goal deeply and offered to give even our class a domestic violence identification and prevention seminar. Finally, Building Futures' third prong is housing. Building Futures exists to help Alameda County individuals and families rebuild their lives after homelessness and/or domestic violence. As a housing first agency, they told us that their goal is to get women and children emotionally, mentally, and documentally ready to move into stable housing. They support the Bessie Coleman Court, a 52-unit housing community providing permanent apartment units to formerly homeless survivors of domestic violence. Additionally, Building Futures works with Alameda County's Housing and Community Development and Social Services departments to run Welcome Home San Leandro and CalWorks, both housing support and rent support services. When asked, others described the emotion behind Building Futures' work as recognizing, respecting, and providing dignity to their clients. When we talked to the Building Futures team, they were adamant on emphasizing that they love on their clients. They have generational lineage as staff, creating a tight-knit community with lots of support. And frankly, this level of care is only backed by performance statistics. In the year 2019 to 2020, of 210 people being served, 160 successfully left to traditional housing. That's approximately an 80% success rate in 1 year. In other highlights, from the 2020 to 2021 year, Building Futures provided 29,883 nights of shelter, received 4,057 calls for shelter, housing, and domestic violence assistance, helped 683 people by street outreach teams in Alameda and San Leandro, gathered 4,095 hours of volunteer service, and served 84,274 meals at their 5 emergency shelters.
In terms of finances, we found Building Futures to be an extremely transparent organization. Not only did they have their financial annual reports from 2014 onward available on their website, they also had their 2014 through 2018 990 forms available, as well as external audit reports. They also shared with us their 2020 through 2021 budget. This most recent budget predicts a growth of about 44.5% from last year, with a projected revenue of about $10 million. Every year, they spend about 70% of their budget on their housing program and shelters, about 9% on homeless street outreach, and about 8% on administration. COVID has had a huge impact on Building Futures, and Anna, who we spoke to from the organization, said they never would have been able to continue to provide their services without the extra grants they receive. I commend Building Futures for their commitment to provide stability, love, and resources to the people they serve during such uncertain times. Some of their extra expenses include things like PPEs and sanitization costs. Others include shifting their operations in order to be able to still provide their services. For example, social distancing guidelines restricted how many people they were able to have in their shelters. Instead of turning anyone away, they provided hotel vouchers. Through Operation Safer Ground, they were able to provide this temporary housing to those most vulnerable to COVID in 52 rooms at the Marina Village Inn home. Building Futures also pivoted to moving online. This was especially important for children who had been shifted to online school. They also moved their counseling for domestic violence into virtual one-on-one sessions. In order to guarantee access to these resources, they expanded and upgraded their internet bandwidth and technology. Clearly an added cost to the organization, but one that allowed Building Futures to provide people with what they needed in a safe manner. They weren't able to open their winter warming shelters due to COVID, so instead they handed out necessities and COVID supplies to homeless encampments. Instead of doing clothing and toy drives, they shifted to gift cards in order to limit any possible exposures to COVID. Building Futures had an existing program that ensured their clients were connected to and had access to health providers. This is especially crucial during a period of public health crisis, and will continue to be an important aspect in their services, and they'll be able to help guide their clients during vaccination rollouts. One thing they really want us to emphasize was the importance of having accessible funds during periods of crisis. The organization was able to adapt to various situations through donations like the one we can provide. Even in the fall, when the air quality wasn't healthy, they quickly moved to provide meals and the appropriate masks to people. The best way to support Building Futures to allow them to continue to do their amazing work is to provide money that gives them the flexibility to continue to be the effective organization that they are.
We have worked with Building Futures to decide that a large part of the grant will go towards the Sister Me Home domestic violence shelter for women and children. This amount of money will truly help the shelter because the shelter needs a lot of money to make sure women are able to find a safe location when they're fleeing violence. For example, a donation of $1,000 will provide 5 nights in a hotel for a woman and 3 children as soon as they are removed from the dangerous situation that they were previously in. Alternatively, it can also provide shelter, 3 meals a day, and support services for one woman for a full month. So a donation of $5,000 to this specific shelter would really help us achieve our goals of our theory of change. But further, because of the coronavirus pandemic, it has been difficult because each of the shelter's capacities has been decreased dramatically to allow for social distancing. So by providing a donation of this magnitude, we would really be able to ensure that the shelter can serve a large amount of women, even if those women are not directly in the shelter itself. But that transition period becomes really critical. The other things that this grant may go towards are providing move-in kits for women who have recently obtained housing and need things like cleaning supplies and small appliances for their new homes when they first get there. And it will also go towards helping support the children's programs of some of the shelters to help children have things to do when they're there, like gardening, art programs, and more. In all, this grant would go a really long way for Building Futures. After talking to the people at Building Futures, it is clear that the combination of their passion and our donation will help them achieve goals that we have laid out in our theory of change, and will also help provide women and children in the Bay Area with access to resources to eventually become housed.
We are overwhelmingly confident in this organization and group of women because they have expressed extreme dedication, which they call irrational commitment, meaning they are dedicated through trials of support and non-support. Their foundation of their warm hearts has cultivated a tightly knit community. They value their clients as individuals and help them on a case-to-case basis, focusing on the individual's needs and comfortability. This organization goes beyond providing housing. They reach out to the community and lead informationals and workshops regarding this matter. They were close as a family and have been able to grow more and more each year.
We wanted to end our presentation with a testimony of someone who was impacted by Building Futures. This is what they had to say. I'm sitting in my bedroom, imagine, with a front door I can lock with my very own key, imagine. My bathroom is mine, imagine. A bathtub, a shower, a refrigerator. Imagine. Just for a moment, imagine your life without these precious things. Building Futures made it possible. Despite my past, despite my inability to get them by myself. No one has ever cared for me that way, except for my mother when I was a child. One thing is certain, all this happened because of you. I'm doing my best to find the words of thanks.
Thank you for listening.